The Disruption, a lively discussion between UVA Darden School of Business professors Yael Grushka-Cocaine and Mike Lennox on cutting-edge technologies and practices that are challenging the status quo.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Yael. How are you doing today?
I am great, actually. This time of year is always a wonderful time of year, and my birthday's coming up, so it always makes me happy. Well, a few weeks away, but I start a long time in advance.
Your 35th?
Yes, exactly. Let's just say that.
Yeah, let's go with that.
You know, I love movies. Have we talked about movies in this podcast before? I think we have a little bit.
A little bit, definitely with AI and entertainment and deep fakes. That's come up a number of times now.
So one of my... not in my top 30 movies, but, you know, up there is Total Recall. Do you remember Total Recall?
I do. That's a Schwarzenegger vehicle. That's a great movie.
Yes. So it always, every time we come to these podcasts, I think about that movie because it feels like, you know, the movie came out in the 90s, early 90s, and it feels like it already predicted half of what we talk about in this podcast. So,
I thought you were going to say I remind you of Arnold Schwarzenegger, but
right.
That's okay. I
okay,
understand.
if I can be Sharon Stone, you can be Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right, how about that?
Thank goodness for AI and deep fakes.
Well, today is a topic that I know is really of interest to you, and that is of autonomous vehicles that don't require us to drive around. I know that you're passionate and interested and fascinated by this. Is that true? Do you still feel that way about the topic?
I do. You know, it's funny, when we started this podcast like a year and a half ago now, we had talked about this as being one of our first topics, and we did another related topic that also is a passion of mine, which is electric vehicles.
Correct.
And what I find fascinating is this is an industry that arguably has two major disruptions. Now, as we talked about with electric vehicles, I think that one's a little more advanced in terms of what we're seeing in the marketplace and how it's transforming the market. But be clear to our listeners, this autonomous vehicle future is also moving quickly and arguably kind of on the horizon here.
And it's interesting to think about them. And I love that you brought up the idea of the EVs and the fact that we're now talking about autonomous vehicles today. Is there a reason why they're so intertwined? Is it the electric part of things that is making autonomous vehicles possible? Is there any link between those advancements or not at all?
Yeah, I mean, one could imagine them being decoupled, right? That you could have an autonomous vehicle that's an internal combustion engine. There's no reason not. However, there are some complementarities here that if you're going to design an AV, especially one from scratch, you probably would want to use an electric vehicle. Most of electric vehicles are heavily software-based, as we've talked about before, lending itself obviously to AV. And you can think about things like charging. You know, you could imagine having an autonomous, gas pump. It's possible, of course, but it would be a lot easier to think about autonomous charging in an electric vehicle. Okay,
fascinating. So we're talking again about vehicles, transportation, but the implications here of autonomous vehicles and autonomous driving is just in some ways very different from the electric vehicles kind of industry. There's just so many implications for society, so many implications for the economy, so many implications for the environment that are really worth this discussion, I think, in detail.
Yeah, no, and I think that's, as a business strategist, what fascinates me about this is this can actually totally restructure the way we consume transportation services. This is not just a change in the kind of form factor or drivetrain of the traditional way we consume cars. This pretends that it could be quite dramatic and really turn over the industry in kind of interesting and unique ways.
But it's not only how we move around and our mode of transportation, but this, I've heard visionaries, and this was a while back, which I'm going to come back to the fact that the visions have been out there.
Total recall.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Total recall, right. So a while back, I heard the folks describing not only the impact on how we get from place A to place B, but this affects who takes the kids to school, how we spend our time. This affects where we park our cars. This affects how we build our buildings, the parking lots, the insurance companies that we need to pay. Like, there's so many derivative and auxiliary effects that are just mind-boggling, that we're talking about a completely different way to live our lives.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
It is. But let's take a step back first.
Okay,
let's talk a little bit about where we are and where the technology hopefully may go here. There's levels of autonomy that we talk about. And arguably, we already have quite a bit of autonomy in many of our vehicles. You think about driver assist, various forms of cruise control, vehicles that will automatically parallel park. These are all forms of autonomy. But the gold standard, if you will, where we'd like to see it go is what we call level 5 autonomy. And in a level 5 autonomous vehicle, I like to joke, and the simplest way to think about it is, it's the one I can fall asleep in the car behind the wheel, or maybe no wheel at all, and feel safe and be taken care of. And the fact is, again, we're getting closer and closer to that, but we're not quite there yet. We're not quite to that point where we would trust the vehicle in that sense, despite some YouTube videos of people doing this, like in their Teslas down the highway and the like.
So what are the main challenges with getting us to that level 5?
Well, as you know well, I mean, at the heart of this is AI again. Once again, we're talking about artificial intelligence, and the way these vehicles are trained is on these massive data sets. And the way to think about those is they're trying to train on all the different contingencies and problems that you might face while you're driving. The challenge is kind of the classic 80-20 rule, though I always like to joke with autonomous vehicles, it might be more like 95-5 at this point, in the sense that for 80% or even 95% of your driving situations, we can actually do really well with autonomy. But that last percent is incredibly difficult. Different weather conditions, when it rains or it snows, just those kind of random events where someone darts in front of the street or a traffic pattern is not what you'd normally expect. That's the hard part. Like, that's the hard part to get this to that full level 5 autonomy where you would just trust these vehicles to drive us around.
So that sounds to me like you're describing more of a software challenge, a data training challenge that we've talked in, as you mentioned, in AI. Yeah. But what about the rest? I mean, autonomous vehicles, I've heard of many different technologies that are hardware, the sensors, the cameras, the different components that sit above, beyond, and back of the car that help us kind of really maybe translate some of the world around us, pick up on what's going on around the vehicle. Is the hardware solved? Is that part of the equation already done?
No, and in fact, there's some critical questions still to be resolved. Though imagine some might think it already they know the answer, but obviously it's a mix of various types of sensors, radar, just cameras on the car. One of the critical questions is LiDAR, which is this advanced technology for basically seeing the environment around the car. Most, I think, of those developing level 5 autonomy or moving towards level 5 see LiDAR as a critical component of the vehicle. And that's when you see cars, maybe you've seen some of these around the road that have like the bubble on the top of the car. That's usually the LiDAR system. Tesla in particular and Elon Musk in particular, has been adamant that you don't need LiDAR. You can solve this with enough data using just simple sensors, simple cameras and the like. And there are debates, let's say. Not everyone agrees with Musk that you can do this with just without a LiDAR system.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Tesla, and I know that we're going to, the name Waymo will come up in our conversation for sure today as a player in the field. So we're seeing a lot of interest from maybe pure data companies like Google, the tech companies, the tech giants, and maybe Tesla is kind of representing those vehicle. Maybe it's more of it's not even a traditional car manufacturing company. But what about the more traditional car manufacturers, the Fords of the world, the BMWs of the world? Are they playing in this space? They're definitely playing in the electric vehicle space, but are they interested in the autonomous vehicle development?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think all of them are investing at some level, again, for these kind of advanced driver assist features. So especially the luxury car manufacturers, but others as well. How they're approaching kind of true level 5 autonomy varies. So one of the big moves taken in the industry was a few years back when General Motors acquired Cruise, who is a startup in this space. So Cruise is in essence the autonomous division for General Motors. Obviously you have Tesla, as you mentioned, who really from day one has been talking about autonomy, and they continue to talk about it on their earnings calls and the like. And then, of course, you mentioned the big tech companies. So Waymo spun out of Google's famous X Lab. You have Amazon getting into the space with Nook, which was an acquisition that they made. Apple is, rumored continuously to be, getting into this space, though more recently they said they're pulling back from their autonomous efforts there, but who knows if Apple will jump in there. So it is attracting a lot of attention from a kind of a wide variety of different players.
So here at Darden, we have a lot of efforts that are focused on talking about responsible AI or leadership, ethical leadership in the world of AI. Let's talk about ethical leadership in the world of autonomous vehicles. And in this disruption, I guess one concern that people may have, which could cause them to label it bad disruption, would be this whole notion of, giving over the total control to the machines, whether hardware or software, and then catastrophic outcomes like accidents happening. So how do we think about that? How do we get our heads around acquiring a whole fleet of these cars for our business?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of a couple minds of this, right? We've talked before, whenever a new technology comes by, there are often risks associated with it that cause consumers and others to be resistant to the new technology. That is not surprising in this case, obviously, given the nature of of what these cars are doing. At the same time, progress is often made, opinions change, and then you get more comfortable with the new technology. And the enthusiasts for AVs would argue that AVs will be actually safer than any real world scenario where you and I are driving our vehicles on the road there. So that this, again, the future will be an accident-free future once we're all using autonomous vehicles there. I do think there are some critical issues. Are you aware of the trolley problem?
I am aware of the trolley problem.
Why don't you explain the trolley problem for our listeners?
The trolley problem, way back when I studied programming, was always presented as a real challenge there when you have to hard code rules and make description of situations for software to basically make a decision and to decide to take route A or route B. You almost have to program in certain difficult pathways and different forks in the road. And here the trolley problem is quite literally, which route do you take when you're faced with two very unwanted outcomes?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a classic moral dilemma question. Yeah. You're going down a hill in a trolley, the brakes give out. Your choices are to continue forward and plow into, let's say, a group of people, or you could divert and maybe kill everyone on the trolley. It's very
there's
morbid.
Variations of that, an old lady crossing the road,
right.
A baby in a stroller.
Right, but the critical thing here is that the AV is going to have to make these decisions. And right now it falls to you and I as individual drivers in the moment to make these decisions. And we have a whole legal apparatus around liability and the like that assesses whether we made maybe the right or wrong decision. That's going to have to be hard-coded in. And maybe it will have to be regulatory that tells the AV makers what they should do in certain circumstances. Maybe it will fall to the AV manufacturers. Lots of questions about liability. You mentioned insurance before. Who gets insured in an AV? Is it the rider now as opposed to the driver? And so these are just some critical issues that are going to need to be resolved before we truly find that AV future.
It's interesting about trust and how do we build trust and some of the challenges for this industry to evolve. My son is 17 and he just got his license just a few weeks ago.
God bless you.
Yes, exactly. This is exactly my point. I have not slept for about a month now since he got his license. And the thought around and by the way, he's a great driver and I'm very proud of him and he's been doing a great job. But it is nerve-wracking and to trust a 17-year-old to take his 13-year-old sister, my daughter to school, that's a big jump. And do I prefer that a machine does it? I don't know. It's a good dilemma, right?
Yeah. I remember when I was teaching my daughter to drive a few years back that saying to her, she might be the last generation that learns how to drive. Will she be teaching her kids how to drive? drive, or again, will we all be buzzing around in our on our AVs?
There's another industry that will be disrupted eventually, maybe the whole driving lesson.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's talk a little bit about the business side of this.
Yes.
Because what's interesting about AVs is that at the end of the day, the whole business model could change. And in fact, companies like Waymo are moving in as ride-sharing companies. So they're really displacing, if you will, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world. But again, could change just the way we even consume cars. Do we even own vehicles in a fully level 5 AV future?
Yeah, I think this is a time for us to bring in people with a little bit more knowledge than us. What do you think?
I think it's always good to bring in some others with some knowledge here. So I have a real treat for us today, Yael. For the first time in Good Disruption podcast history here,
we innovate ourselves.
We do.
Yes.
We actually have two experts. This topic is too big for just one expert. We have two experts with us. So I'm very pleased that we have Will Shepherdson here, a former student of both of ours, a Darden MBA, and is a product manager at Waymo, who we had mentioned, one of the leaders here in developing autonomous vehicles. And then we also have Madhur Behl, who is an associate professor at computer science at UVA, who does research on machine learning, AI, but also on autonomy, and does work on the robotics and small cars that we're talking about here. So we're very excited to have both of them with us here.
It's fantastic. Both academia and the business world are represented. So I'm excited. I have so many questions.
Yes. Well, Madhur, I'd like to start with you. Given your expertise and your work here, can you give us any sense, level 5, like how close are we here? I always joke, like Elon Musk said, we'd have it like 2 years ago, and he keeps saying every year we're there. What's your sense? How close are we to this level 5 dream?
Yeah, I think you are right in assessing that most of the predictions are very hyperbole, in my opinion. This is a very, very difficult problem. And I heard you talking about this earlier, that this is really a problem in AI, right? Because this is a very smart robot, essentially, which has to understand how the world operates and be able to deal with these all possible situations that could arise. And as flawed as humans might be, we are surprisingly good at generalizing the skill that we have to different situations. That's sort of the the remarkable ability that humans possess. Like, so for example, your son who just got his license, he will learn to drive in maybe about 3 or 4 days, or maybe a week at most, and he'll improve throughout his lifetime as he drives more.
Yes.
But he has ability to generalize that experience, right? So I was actually surprised when I came to the US many years ago. I got a license, and then I learned that I could drive a U-Haul truck with the same license, right? So because we trust that driving and analyzing how the world works, getting a sense for what different situations arise, how to navigate in the presence of other vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists. We trust the human intellect and this generalized intelligence to behave correctly. And this is really where the level 5 is very hard. And just to clarify, level 5 and level 4, they are nearest neighbors. Level 4 is when the human does not have to intervene at all. So it could be completely hands-free, and you could still sort of sleep, and you are not required to intervene. If you can sleep without being anxious, that is. But the difference between level 4 and level 5 is that level 5 really means that this car, which is already human-free, and we've had many of these operate in a few selected cities in the US. Level 5 means that they could drive anywhere. Under any conditions, not restricted to a couple of neighborhoods or just in certain cities, and not just in the sunny parts of the country, but under fog, under rain, any kind of conditions. That's level 5. So this is precisely why level 5 is way, way out there in the future. Like, getting to level 5 autonomous driving, in my opinion, would really mean that we have had a breakthrough in generalized artificial intelligence, because I would say we don't even have generalized driving intelligence right now. We can all agree that driving is a very intelligent task. But, these cars, the software on these cars, it cannot work on a different hardware, just like a human could drive a sedan or a SUV. So that's something fundamental is missing in that sense. And it's a very difficult problem because at the end of the day, it just boils down to this sort of one word which could describe why this is such a technical problem is it's a problem of coverage, right? So in the real world, you have uncountable number of objects in all shades, colors, and varieties that could appear in the scene in front of you. You have different environments, which we sort of, it's more beyond just, lighting environments and weather. And then you also have the interplay of both of these, right? So how these different entities in the world around you interact with each other is, again, some infinite long tail of possible situations. And no engineer or group of engineers could adequately describe what these situations are a priori.
Fascinating. That has helped so much to kind of make it clear to folks exactly where the challenges lie. Will, on the business side, how do you as a product manager on the business side cope with some of this challenge and some of these real hurdles that we face still in the advancement?
Yeah, and just for sort of context, Waymo's mission is to be the most trusted driver, and I think sort of safety is at the center of everything that we do. Our goal is to reduce sort of traffic injuries and fatalities in the cities in which we're operating, and now we have sort of quite a bit of experience and history working towards that goal. We actually operate, a fully autonomous ride service in 4 different cities right now: San Francisco, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Austin. And I think, to the point about sort of L4 versus L5, I think the definition of L5 is somewhat unconstrained. Like, it could be, a dirt road, an unpaved dirt road in the middle of nowhere that someone drives, every once in a while. And I think that from if our goal is like reducing traffic injuries and fatalities, a lot of those tend to be concentrated in cities. And we think there is both an opportunity to meet this goal of improving safety on the roads and also sort of build a business and offer a product that our riders want to use. So, we have, a lot of enthusiasm. We've been offering a commercial service in San Francisco since the mid of August in 2023. Same in Phoenix and recently expanded in Los Angeles and Austin. I think that with an L4 product, our goal is to build an L4 autonomous driving system and operate a service that brings people from point A to point B safely. I think the Waymo driver doesn't drive distracted or drunk. So, we think that there are sort of real safety benefits. We believe that there's real safety benefits to, operating the Waymo driver. And I think that some of the data actually indicates this. So, there's a couple research partnerships I can tell about if that's interesting. But, one statistic is that we actually experienced 85% fewer crashes that led to injuries than comparable human driving benchmarks over about 7 million miles of fully autonomous driving.
Yeah.
So this train,
That's fascinating.
Well, it also is interesting to think through, what is the correct logic for when these cars, and they already are on the roads, but come on the roads? Is it 100%, no error rate, or
Right.
is there some exception? Because again, let's point it out, there are millions of car accidents on the road now.
Right.
So, maybe the baseline should be improvement over where we currently are
Of course.
with these vehicles.
But I liked putting together the 2 comments from both of you. Level 5 is going to be really hard, and it's going to require a big improvement and developments in how we do things. It's worthy of working towards, but at the same time, what maybe is exciting to hear about is how companies strategize on doing more local and more narrow kind of investments to work within the L4 kind of opportunities. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, and I'm actually, Will, a question for you. In the offhand, let's say a snowstorm hits San Francisco. I don't know if that ever actually happens, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it does. I assume you have like protocols then that maybe you shut the fleet down, or how do you handle maybe some of those outlying cases?
Yeah, so I guess one of the common misconceptions is I think Waymo for a long time operated in Phoenix and like the suburbs like Phoenix greater metropolitan area. And I think people were like, wow, there's never any weather in Phoenix. Like people have sort of gone there because it's easy. And I think that is maybe a little bit of a simplification. Like Phoenix actually does get like severe storms in the summer, and like it gets weather exposure. It's sort of not sunny and beautiful all the time. So I think that even cities that have relatively mild climates experience weather conditions. Waymo does a huge amount of sort of testing and evaluation and validation to operate in these more rare, conditions. And I can actually talk specifically about weather because that's something that, I work on at Waymo, which is that we have done a lot of intentional work around validating our performance in more rare weather conditions that we experience in the cities that we're operating in. We also do sort of excursions and field trips to other geographies that have more extreme weather. So in the past, we've experienced like winter weather from some of these trips that we've taken to New York City, Bellevue, Washington. This past winter, we were operating a small fleet of vehicles in Buffalo, New York. And we actually have an engineering center in Michigan. So we're able to take the Waymo driver to these new geos and improve our learning about how does the Waymo driver perform in those conditions. We can take the relatively small amount of driving that we do on the public roads that's complemented with lab and sort of chamber testing that's done at a sensor level and at a vehicle level. We also do closed course testing in extreme weather conditions. Closed course. Oh, and then I need to mention sort of simulation. So simulation plays a large role in our development process and validation of the Waymo driver. So we're able to re-simulate our experience and sort of continue to learn from it without having to drive more real world miles. We drive far more miles in simulation than in the real world, and use that to sort of gain confidence about the performance of the Waymo driver in these kind of rare conditions. So I'd say we actually know quite a bit about these extreme weather events, both because of accumulated experience over a number of years, but a lot of targeted testing and validation work that we've done.
My mom likes to remind me that I was 3 years old living in Buffalo during the blizzard of '77. So that was quite an extreme event that I don't know quite has happened since. But I want to actually kind of pivot to Madhur and hear. We heard from Will how Waymo learn and train and get more exposure. Can you tell us on the academic side? You've shared with me a little bit that you guys have a racing team. Can you tell me how the academic world pushes the needle on advancements here?
Yeah, for sure. I do lead the university's autonomous racing team. So, on a good day, any self-driving car would go, the speed limit. But here we have a full-scale Indy racing car with no driver. There's no steering wheel, so it's not level 4 quite because it's not comparable to running in the streets. But we've been able to run this car at 150, 160 miles per hour completely autonomously and overtaking other competitors. The idea being that in academia, we try to explore the limits of any technology, and so my crazy hypothesis was that. Just like motorsport racing has always served as some sort of proving grounds for regular automotive technology, any kind of improvement you have in your car, you can trace its origin to some innovation in motorsports. In fact, that's why motorsport was invented, because back in the day when we were transitioning from horse-driven carriages to horseless carriages, there was the same skepticism that this new technology is not going to be safe. And so motorsport became a way to demonstrate the performance and safety. So now we are going in the beginning of the same transition. We are going from driver-driven carriages to driverless carriages. So why not use the same principles and pit these cars in extreme conditions intentionally against each other. So put them to the limits of what breaks them, so that we can collectively learn and advance. And that's why racing is an extreme version of it. But broadly speaking, if you go to any top machine learning robotics conference in the last 10 years, there are dedicated sessions on how do you predict better trajectories? How do you handle pedestrians' behaviors better? Because this is where these cars seem to be struggling. They either fail to just realize what the world looks like, because there's so many things to detect and it can get confused, or it fails to be clairvoyant and predict the next few seconds in order for it to plan its correct course of action. So academia has worked in this problem space for many, many years. The entire self-driving car industry sort of started from an academic experiment with the DARPA Grand Challenges, and that collaborative spirit still continues, although the industry has taken the lead in deploying them in the real world and learning lessons based on the mistakes that they encounter.
Getting to the motorsport thing, I'm one of those watchers that kind of maybe enjoys the accidents every once in a while. Of course, you don't want them to be fatal or anything like that. Right. But I don't know if we're going to eliminate that if you don't have accidents with these. Madhur, I was curious. Will had mentioned the simulation piece, which I find fascinating. What are your thoughts as a computer scientist on this idea of training our AIs using a simulated environment? My understanding, Will, in Waymo is millions of miles on the road, but billions of miles in the simulation. So Madhur, how do you think about this idea of training AI on simulations?
I think it's a good idea, and one which is widely acknowledged that should be part of any good development cycle. Essentially, if you just wait for the car to rack up enough miles to generate meaningful data for it to be comparable to human level error, then peer reviewed studies indicate that you'll have to wait for some 250 million miles per car or something crazy number, which will take decades for us to achieve. But you could drive them, as you pointed out, in simulation at scale, and you could also vary different sort of conditions that you may encounter. So this is definitely something which is a good overall thing, and it can help you improve how the car behaves in the real world. The challenge with simulation, which is also well studied and well known, is that there's always going to be a gap, which is called a sim to real gap, between no matter how sophisticated your simulator is, it either will have a gap in the physics, or maybe it doesn't simulate the sensor level physics that well, versus what the real world is, which is very, very analog. And you cannot really, I said earlier, have the foresight to seed the simulation in a manner that will give you the confidence that no matter what happens in the real world, it will make the safe decision. Now, I think it's reasonable to say that there shouldn't be some expectation that these vehicles are never supposed to crash. The trouble is that it's not just the number of crashes which are indicative of the safety of these vehicles. It's sometimes also the kind of crashes that the AI makes that no reasonable human would make. Now, I know we have a mix of bad drivers, distracted drivers, but we also have good drivers. And so these cars have to level up and be as good, if not better, than most good drivers who are not distracted, who are not drunk when they drive. And some of the mistakes which we don't have much transparency into, unfortunately, they seem to suggest that these are some common sense errors which humans wouldn't make. Like if you hit a pedestrian, there's no way you are going to drag the pedestrian another 20 feet. Right. So that again necessitates that some real world testing is required, but it throws open this debate of whether what is that fine line? Because the concern is that the pace of deployment might exceed our ability to test these vehicles for safety.
Yeah, and so I want to pivot to Will. We've talked a lot about safety, and I can totally see the need to, and any improvement in safety, quite frankly, will all benefit as a society, given that accidents happen too frequently. And I hear you, maybe not a reduction to zero accidents, Madhur, but some reduction. But Will, you're a Darden MBA. You have all your multifaceted kind of perspectives. What about the sustainability, environmental benefits? Like, are there other benefits that we haven't mentioned, or on the flip side, other concerns, like, some kind of jobs being lost, or something that we should be thinking about holistically in the conversation around autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, I guess, you mentioned earlier that like one of your first, I don't know if it was the first or one of the first episodes was on sort of electric vehicles. And we have, a fully electric fleet, which are Jaguar I-Paces. I guess one comment that I wanted to mention about that is, I think the like charging infrastructure, for fleets, both Waymo and other fleets, has somewhat like lagged behind the adoption of electric vehicles. So I think that that's something that, is sort of like both a benefit and a challenge. This is something that like Waymo's been planning with our partners for a long time, but that's, sort of one challenge for adoption of our fully electric fleet. I think in terms of, to your question about like, jobs, I think that there are like a lot of different jobs that are created by, our service, like through operating our service. And, I think that that is like sort of, inevitable that like jobs change over time. That's sort of like my personal opinion, I guess, not Waymo's, but I think it's sort of like inevitable that like, jobs somewhat shift over time. And I think that sometimes, when people, I guess that's probably what I'd say.
It is true when there's innovation. We've talked a lot in this podcast. With any innovation, we see a whole industry being created at the same time, maybe a shift from one type of job to the next.
No, and this has come up repeatedly, especially as we've talked quite a bit about AI.
Yeah.
I wish we could keep going. I think we could go for like another hour, but our producer's in our ear telling us, no, we need to keep on our normal limits here. I just want to thank Will and Madhur for your time and for sharing some of your thoughts there. Again, appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thank you both for coming. I learned a lot, and I can't wait to see UVA racing team beat the competitors.
Yeah, we race many times a year, and we try to be safe, but we've had some wrecks, but every wreck is a very, very expensive learning experience for us. Yeah.
Well, good luck.
And Will, I'm waiting for Waymo to come to Charlottesville.
Yes,
so that's we need that here.
Next time in San Francisco, I'm going to take a robo-taxi.
Please do. Yeah, encourage if you're in San Francisco, Phoenix, LA County, or Austin. It's a great opportunity to experience the product.
So I'm in two minds. I'm so excited about a future where I don't have to drive places, although I do like to drive my little Mini around. But I can imagine that it's so much safer, especially on long drives from DC late at night. But it seems like there are some real hurdles before this becomes common in every household. Do you agree?
I do. But I think we see this with technology all the time, that when it first comes to market, it's often niche entry. So for example, we didn't talk about this yet, but one place you're seeing quite a bit of autonomy is in tractors. Closed environment, don't have some of the risks. So John Deere.
Fewer pedestrians.
Hopefully no one's running across the field. John Deere has a number of products out there that are basically, farmerless tractors that drive across the fields there. We see it in delivery vehicles. So again, it's not transporting people. The risks are lower. On a lot of college campuses, you see these little delivery vehicles for pizzas and the like to the dorms. Again, the risks are much lower. I think if it hits you, maybe it breaks an ankle at worst, so the risks are lower. And I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see, continued usage. I think one of the interesting use cases that at least my understanding is we're getting much closer on, long-haul trucking. So what you might see are trucks on the highway be fully autonomous. And then when they pull off, that last mile problem of getting to wherever they're going might need a human driver behind the wheel. But we might be pretty close to seeing that fully autonomous truck going down the highway.
A few years ago, I took, not Will's cohort, but the year after, I took a group of students to Sweden, and we heard from a company investing in trucking, autonomous trucking. But they were actually manipulated, and basically there were people in an office with joysticks basically driving them from far away, which was a very different kind of new innovation around that same concept. Still labor intensive, but maybe not as dangerous for them, and just something kind of peculiar to think about.
A little bit different. Well, I think it's time for us to answer the big question.
Ooh.
Good disruption, bad disruption, no disruption.
Oh, it's a tough one. I kind of know your answer already. I feel that...
What do you think my answer is going to be?
I think your answer is going to be good disruption. I think you're in favor of it.
Yeah.
I think you think it's a disruption for sure, and that it's good. I think that it's funny for me. I haven't seen it disrupt us yet that much, right? I think that in order for it to be huge disruption, I would expect industries changing or key players fundamentally flipping from certain manufacturers to another. I think arguably the EVs have done maybe a little bit more of that with Tesla's prominence and how it's affected other car manufacturers. But maybe it will be good disruption. I just think that it's a little bit more in the future than people would like to think.
Yeah, I actually don't disagree with that. I think I definitely think as it comes to being, it will be disruptive, a large part because of also the business model implications. Again, in a world of ride sharing, and we maybe aren't purchasing vehicles ourselves, that's a radical shift in the way the market currently operates, obviously. How long it will take for us to fully get there is obviously the open question. And I think, to Will's earlier point that, cities, right? Will we see a city make a choice to just make only autonomous vehicles, to remove some of the,
So houses don't need parking, and you can build different housing structures and neighborhoods.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about some of the risk and safety here. So there wouldn't be the human drivers kind of interacting with these vehicles. Maybe we'll see that, but it probably will be this kind of longer transition. I don't think it's no disruption, though. I think there's enough proof of concept of the technology. I don't think this is like a bubble where, we laugh about the fact that we were trying this, back in the 2020s. I think there's enough effort taking place, enough progress, enough market actual adoption that we'll see this continue and continue to disrupt the industry.
That's great, and it's interesting because maybe we need to broaden our definition of disrupting which industry. It's going to affect maybe different types of industries, as you pointed out, with the tractors, and maybe even the opportunity is yet to be realized.
Oh yeah, and I think again the spillover. We talked about insurance, parking garages. We have parking garages in the future. There's a whole bunch of industries that are reliant on us, especially in the U.S., driving our vehicles that we own from point A to point B. And that might look radically different in the future.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, there's hope for all parents there from the, for kids ages 10 to 17, when all your day is spent being a taxiing them around. There is hope for somebody else to do that one day.
That is a good disruption for sure. If there ever was, that's a good disruption.
Well, thanks, Mike. I learned a lot.
And let me thank, as always, Gary, our producer, and Becky, our researcher extraordinaire. This is Good Disruption, and thank you for being with us.
Good Disruption is a podcast from the University of Virginia Darden School of Business.